In the far west of the ancient world, where the sun sank each evening into the waters of the Atlantic, there were whispers of a kingdom bathed in gold, a land of silver rivers, endless wealth, and a people whose name echoed in the writings of Greeks and Phoenicians alike. This place was called Tartessos. Some said it was as rich as Egypt, as mysterious as Babylon, and perhaps even the inspiration for Plato's tale of Atlantis. Yet, just as suddenly as it rose, Tartessos vanished, leaving behind no great ruins, only scattered treasures, half-forgotten legends, and unanswered questions. Tonight, we journey to the edge of the known world, to the river valleys of southern Spain, to rediscover the story of this lost city of gold. Settle in, let your mind drift back through the ages, and follow the trail of one of history's most enduring mysteries. Because this is the entire story of Tartessos, Spain's lost golden kingdom. When we turn to the edges of the known ancient world, we find whispers of a kingdom that dazzled the imagination of Greeks and Phoenicians alike. This was Tartessos, a land said to gleam with gold and silver, hidden along the southern coasts of Iberia. It was not merely a city, nor simply a people, but an entire world that seemed to rise from the rich rivers and fertile plains where Europe meets the Atlantic. For centuries, its name has stirred both historians and dreamers. Was it fact, or was it legend? The earliest voices that reach us from the ancient world do not dismiss Tartessos as a myth. They speak of it with the same confidence as they do of Egypt or Lydia. Among them was Herodotus, the father of history, who wrote of a Tartessian king named Arganthonios. This ruler was said to have reigned for 80 years and lived to an age of 120. Such longevity belongs more to the realm of legend than history, yet Herodotus presents it as truth. Arganthonios, we are told, welcomed the Greek sailors from the distant city of Phocea, offering them wealth and land if they would settle in his kingdom. It is a small glimpse, but enough to suggest that Tartessos was no backwater. It was a place of immense power and riches, able to receive foreign guests with generosity that only a prosperous monarch could afford. Descriptions of Tartessos often focus on wealth, for this land was known above all for its metals. Silver from the Iberian mountains poured through its rivers to the coast, where it was traded across the Mediterranean. The Greeks marveled at stories of silver so plentiful that even the anchors of Tartessian ships were said to be made from it. This was not simply commerce, but abundance on a scale that seemed almost unreal. And yet archaeological discoveries in southern Spain, from silver hoards to richly adorned tombs, hint that there is truth behind the stories. But alongside these fragments of fact comes the mist of legend. Few details survive. Tartessos appears briefly in Greek and Phoenician accounts, then falls silent. We know almost nothing of its rulers beyond Arganthonios. We have no surviving architecture like the temples of Greece or the pyramids of Egypt. The very name of Tartessos seems to dissolve into obscurity after the 6th century BCE. Was it truly a great city that thrived for centuries, or only a collection of wealthy settlements magnified by rumor? It is this uncertainty that has tied Tartessos to one of the most enduring stories of all time, the legend of Atlantis. When Plato described a mighty power that once ruled beyond the pillars of Heracles, only to be swallowed by the sea, many later thinkers could not resist drawing a line toward Tartessos. Here, after all, was a civilization on the Atlantic fringe, fabulously rich, suddenly lost. Some saw in this Spanish kingdom the seeds of the Atlantean tale. Others argued that Tartessos was Atlantis itself, misremembered across centuries. Whether or not this connection holds, It adds to the aura of mystery. Tartessos becomes not only a lost kingdom, but a bridge between history and myth. To the Greeks who sailed westward, it must have seemed a place at the very edge of the world, where the sun dipped into the ocean each evening and where wealth beyond imagination lay waiting. To later ages, it was a puzzle, a golden city half hidden in the mists of time. Picture for a moment the scene. Along the banks of the Guadalquivir River, ships laden with silver and copper glide down to the sea. Markets bustle with foreign merchants, from Tyre, from Phocaea, from distant Mediterranean ports. A king greets his guests in halls adorned with treasures mined from his own soil. The city is alive with energy, its wealth and influence radiating across the seas. Then, without warning, the voices fall silent. The name of Tartessos fades from the records, as if swallowed by time itself. This is the legend that endures. A glittering world glimpsed only in fragments, remembered by a handful of writers, and rediscovered piece by archaeologists today. To begin the story of Tartessos is to walk a fine line between history and myth, between what was and what might have been. At the edge of the known world, the kingdom of Tartessos once stood, radiant with wealth and mystery. And it is here, at this forgotten frontier, that our journey begins. To understand Tartessos, we must first picture its land. Southern Spain, known today as Andalusia, is a region of dramatic contrasts. Rolling hills and fertile plains descend toward the broad valley of the Guadalquivir River. This river begins in the mountains of eastern Andalusia and flows westward, winding its way to the Atlantic Ocean at its mouth. The river widens into marshes and tidal flats before meeting the open sea. In the ancient world, this landscape offered both natural protection and direct access to the vast waters of the Atlantic, a perfect setting for a wealthy and outward-looking kingdom. The Guadalquivir Valley was not only fertile but also rich. In natural resources, its soils produced abundant crops of wheat, olives, and grapes, while the surrounding hills concealed immense mineral wealth. Silver, copper, and gold were found in quantities rarely matched elsewhere in the Mediterranean. These metals were not simply mined but shaped into a source of power. They filled the treasuries of kings, fueled trade with foreign merchants, and allowed Tartessos to shine in the imagination of outsiders as a land overflowing with riches. Archaeology confirms what ancient writers hinted at. Across Andalusia, evidence of settlements and fortified towns reveals a society that was both organized and prosperous. Near Cadiz, the site of Dona Blanca preserves layers of occupation from the first millennium BCE, with defensive walls, houses, and wine-making facilities that suggest a thriving community. In Huelva, rich tombs have yielded treasures of gold and silver, delicate jewelry, and finely crafted weapons. The famous Carambolo treasure, a hoard of golden diadems, pectorals, and bracelets discovered near Seville, testifies to the wealth and artistry of the people who lived here. Each discovery reminds us that the wealth of Tartessos was no invention of poets. It was a real economy grounded in metal, trade, and agriculture. But Tartessos was more than a kingdom of local farmers and miners. Its position at the edge of the Atlantic made it a crossroads of cultures. For centuries, Phoenician sailors had sailed westward from their homeland in the Levant, establishing colonies across the Mediterranean. They founded Gadar, today's Cadiz, one of the oldest continuously inhabited cities in Europe, and from there they extended their influence inland. They traded for silver, copper, and tin, bringing in return fine goods from the east, such as glass, purple dye, and intricately crafted ornaments. The Phoenician presence introduced new technologies, new religious ideas, and even new styles of writing to Iberia. The Greeks, too, arrived in search of metals. Sailors from Phocaea reached the Tartessian coast in the 7th and 6th centuries BCE. They were welcomed by King Arganthonios himself, according to Herodotus. For the Greeks, Tartessos was not only a source of wealth, but also a gateway to lands beyond, where the Atlantic stretched into mystery. The contact between Greek merchants and Tartessians brought not only trade, but cultural exchange, with pottery, art, and myths crossing the seas in both directions. The interaction of Iberians, Phoenicians, and Greeks created a unique fusion. Tartessos stood at the meeting point of traditions. Its people were Iberian in their roots, yet influenced by Eastern religion, Mediterranean trade, and Greek ideas. The result was a society both distinctive and cosmopolitan, able to absorb foreign influences while maintaining its own identity. The undeciphered inscriptions found in the region suggest the development of a script, perhaps derived from Phoenician letters, yet used to express a local tongue. This mixture of outside contact and local innovation reveals a kingdom both open and independent. All of this prosperity depended on the control of metals and the mastery of maritime trade. The rivers of southern Spain were the highways of Tartessos, carrying goods from the interior mines down to the coastal settlements. From there, ships sailed eastward, carrying Iberian silver and copper to markets across the Mediterranean. In return, luxury goods flowed back to Tartessos, reinforcing the wealth of its elites and deepening its connections to distant lands. The kingdom rose on the twin pillars of metal and sea, its influence radiating far beyond its borders. When we imagine Tartessos at the height of its power, we see a landscape of fertile farms feeding a growing population, mines ringing with the sound of metal being extracted and forged, and harbors filled with ships of many nations. It was a land that seemed almost destined for greatness, placed in a position where nature and geography combined to create wealth. Yet, as with many golden kingdoms, its very prosperity would make it a target for rivals and a prize to be contested. For now, in this chapter of its story, Tartessos stands secure, glittering at the mouth of the Guadalquivir. Its riches flow outward to the world, and in return, the world comes to its gates. This land of abundance, shaped by river, soil, and sea, provided the foundation upon which the legend of Spain's lost city of gold would be built. The story of Tartessos is not only about rivers and trade routes. At its heart were the people who built their lives along the Guadalquivir and who shaped a society that fascinated outsiders, although their voice reaches us only faintly through inscriptions and artifacts. Enough remains to suggest a culture that was both distinctive and deeply connected to the wider Mediterranean world. One of the most intriguing mysteries is their language. Inscriptions, written in what scholars call the Tartessian script, have been found across southwestern Spain and Portugal. This writing system appears to have been adapted from the Phoenician alphabet, yet it expresses a language that does not resemble any known tongue. Some see echoes of early Celtic influences. Others argue it may have been a unique Iberian language. Whatever the case, it remains undeciphered. These fragments are the only surviving words of the Tartessians, silent witnesses carved in stone and metal, reminders that we are still far from fully understanding who these people were. Religion played a powerful role in their society. Archaeological discoveries and ancient references suggest that the Tartessians worshipped the sun, a natural focus in a land of wide skies and fertile fields. Yet their beliefs were not isolated. Contact with Phoenician traders brought new deities and rituals. The Phoenician god Melkart, a protector of seafarers and cities, appears to have been honored in the region. Astarte, goddess of fertility and war, and Baal, associated with storms and fertility, may also have entered the local pantheon. These influences mingled with native traditions, producing a religious life that blended reverence for nature with Mediterranean cults. Ritual offerings of gold and silver in rivers and sanctuaries suggest a people who connected wealth and the divine, dedicating treasures to ensure prosperity and favor from the gods. Among all figures in Tartessian history, one name shines most brightly. Arganthonius, remembered by the Greek historian Herodotus, was the great king of this land. He is said to have lived for 120 years, ruling for 80. Legends of such long life blur the line between fact and myth, yet Herodotus presents him as a real monarch who welcomed Greek sailors from the city of Phocaea. He even offered them land to settle, urging them to make Tartessos their home. Also gave them vast sums of money to build defensive walls in their homeland, a gesture that reveals both his wealth and his far-reaching influence. This single glimpse offers us the vision of a ruler who commanded immense resources and saw his kingdom as a partner in the wider Mediterranean stage. The grandeur of Tartessian kings was described in terms that suggest dazzling opulence. Ancient authors spoke of halls decorated with silver and gold, of cups and thrones fashioned from precious metals. While such accounts may carry exaggeration, the treasures unearthed by archaeologists support the idea that Tartessos was a society where elites surrounded themselves with wealth. Golden diadems, silver vessels, and ornate jewelry reveal a courtly culture that projected power through splendor. To outsiders arriving by ship, the riches of the Tartessian court must have seemed almost unbelievable. Yet life in Tartessos was not only about kings and treasures. Daily existence for the majority of its people was grounded in the cycles of agriculture and trade. Farmers cultivated wheat and barley on the fertile floodplains, raised olives and grapes, and tended herds of livestock. Fishermen worked the rivers and coastal waters, providing food for both locals and foreign traders. River traffic carried goods between inland settlements and the coastal harbors. Metallurgy was a central craft, with workshops producing tools, weapons, and ornaments from the copper and silver drawn from the surrounding hills. In this way, the wealth of the land was not only extracted but transformed into objects that reflected both utility and beauty. The society of Tartessos was shaped by constant contact with the outside world. Phoenician merchants introduced luxury goods, artistic styles, and religious practices. Greeks brought pottery, ideas, and stories. Yet the Tartessians were not passive recipients. They blended these influences into their own traditions, creating a culture that was both unique and cosmopolitan. The undeciphered script, the distinctive art styles, and the hybrid religious practices all speak of a people confident in their own identity, even as they engaged with the currents of the Mediterranean. When we step back, the picture of Tartessos that emerges is of a kingdom both mysterious and radiant. Its language remains hidden, its religion only partly known, its rulers remembered in fragments. And yet, within those fragments, we see a society that was vibrant, wealthy, and deeply connected to the world beyond its shores. At its heart stood Kings like Arganthonios, figures who embodied both the glory and the enigma of Spain's lost city of gold. The wealth of Tartessos did not exist in isolation. It was created and sustained by the flow of goods, people, and ideas across the Mediterranean. At the heart of this system were two great seafaring powers, the Phoenicians and the Greeks, who both looked westward to the Iberian Peninsula with hunger in their eyes. For each, Tartessos represented not only a source of silver, copper, and gold, but also a gateway to the mysteries of the Atlantic Ocean and the lands that stretched beyond the Pillars of Heracles. The Phoenicians were the first to arrive, sailing. From their homeland in Tyre and other cities of the Levant, they had already established colonies throughout the central Mediterranean by the 9th century BCE. One of their most important settlements was Gadara, today known as Cadeus, located near the mouth of the Guadalquivir. From this base, the Phoenicians reached inland, trading with the Tartessians and bringing with them luxury items such as glass, purple-dyed cloth, and fine ornaments. In return, they received silver in staggering quantities. Ancient sources claim that the mines of Iberia were so rich that Phoenician ships almost sank under the weight of the metal they carried back. While such stories may be embellished, archaeological evidence supports the idea that Tartessian silver flowed east in vast amounts, enriching the Phoenician cities and funding their expansion. The arrival of the Greeks added a new dimension. Around the 7th and 6th centuries BCE, sailors from the city of Phocaea, on the coast of Asia Minor, began pushing westward in search of new markets. They reached Tartessos and were welcomed by King Arganthonios himself. According to Herodotus, the king treated them with generosity, offering them land and wealth, and even supporting their efforts to fortify their homeland against enemies. This account shows not only the openness of Tartessos to Greek contact, but also the scale of its resources. To be able to fund the construction of city walls in distant Ionia suggests a kingdom that was both rich and eager to strengthen ties with powerful allies. Yet the friendship between Tartessos and the Greeks came at a cost. The Phoenicians had long enjoyed dominance in the western Mediterranean, and the arrival of Greek merchants threatened that control. Competition for Iberian metals grew intense. Greek pottery found in Andalusia reveals the extent of their presence, while Phoenician colonies expanded their networks to counter the new arrivals. Behind the scenes, a struggle unfolded between these two seafaring civilizations, with Tartessos caught at the center. For the Tartessians, this rivalry could be exploited. By balancing relations with both groups, they ensured a steady flow of goods and maintained their position as indispensable brokers of trade. Tartessos was not only a partner for foreign merchants, but also a bridge between the Mediterranean and the Iberian interior. The kingdom controlled access to the rich mines of the southwest, as well as trade routes that stretched deep into the peninsula. Metals, livestock, and agricultural produce were gathered from inland tribes and funneled through Tartessian markets to the coast. In return, Mediterranean goods traveled back upriver, spreading new technologies and luxuries far beyond the coast. This role as intermediary magnified the power of Tartessos, turning it into a hub that linked distant cultures together. Archaeological finds underscore the breadth of this network. Tartessian artifacts have been discovered far from their homeland, carried across trade routes that reached Italy, North Africa, and even the Near East. Greek pottery, Phoenician amulets, and Eastern luxury goods have been unearthed in Tartessian sites, showing how deeply connected the kingdom was to global trade of its day. These exchanges were not limited to objects. Artistic styles, religious ideas, and technologies all moved along the same routes, enriching Tartessian culture and making it one of the most cosmopolitan societies of the ancient West at its height. Tartessos enjoyed what can only be called a golden age. Silver and copper from its mines supported thriving workshops and filled the coffers of its elites. Ships arrived at its harbors from across the Mediterranean, their sails bringing foreign goods and foreign stories. The king's court displayed treasures that spoke of both local skill and distant artistry. Farmers worked fertile lands, while metallurgists and traders ensured that wealth continued to flow. It was a society that had found its place in the wider world and prospered through its ability to connect, adapt, and mediate. This prosperity was not merely economic, but also cultural. By interacting with both Phoenicians and Greeks, Tartessos became a melting pot of ideas. It absorbed the writing systems of the East, experimented with artistic motifs, and adopted religious practices that blended with its own traditions. The result was a civilization that stood at the crossroads of Europe and the Mediterranean, uniquely Iberian yet deeply engaged with the great powers of its age. In this web of alliances and rivalries, Tartessos shone brightly. It was a kingdom whose strength lay not in conquest but in trade, not in isolation but in connection. At its peak, it stood as a beacon of wealth and culture on the Atlantic edge of the ancient world. Yet, as history has often shown, golden ages are fragile, and the same forces that create prosperity can also bring decline. Every golden age carries within it the seeds of its own decline. For Tartessos, the end came with startling suddenness. Around 500 BCE, the kingdom that had dazzled Greeks and Phoenicians with its wealth and power seems to vanish from history. Ancient authors who once wrote of its kings and riches fall silent. The archaeological record grows thinner. What was once a radiant power on the Atlantic frontier fades into obscurity, leaving only questions in its place. Why did Tartessos disappear so quickly, and how could such a prosperous society collapse? One of the leading explanations looks to war and conquest. By the late 6th and early 5th centuries BCE, the balance of power in the western Mediterranean had shifted. The Phoenician colonies, under the leadership of Carthage, had begun to assert themselves aggressively. Carthage sought to dominate trade routes, especially those that supplied metals from Iberia. The Greeks, who had found a welcome in Tartessos, under King Arganthonios, were increasingly pushed out by Carthaginian power. Some historians suggest that Tartessos may have resisted this domination and suffered defeat at the hands of Carthaginian forces. If so, its independence would have been crushed, its prosperity redirected to serve foreign masters, and its identity gradually erased. Another theory considers the role of the environment. The Guadalquivir River, lifeline of Tartessos, is not a static landscape. Over centuries, rivers change course, ports silt up, and fertile lands can flood or dry. It is possible that the harbors that once connected Tartessos to the wider world became less navigable. Silt and marsh may have cut off trade routes, leaving settlements isolated. For a kingdom so dependent on maritime exchange, even a modest environmental shift could have had devastating consequences. A once thriving port may have become a backwater in a matter of generations, cutting off Tartessos from the very trade that sustained it. Internal weakness provides another possible explanation. Tartessos was a society built on metals and trade. Its elites enriched themselves through the flow of silver and copper, but such prosperity may have left the kingdom vulnerable. If the ruling class grew too dependent on external trade and too removed from the realities of its own people, social instability could have followed. A collapse of trust between elites and commoners, combined with foreign pressure and environmental strain, might have unraveled the cohesion of the kingdom. In such a scenario, Tartessos did not fall to a single blow, but gradually withered from within. What makes the disappearance of Tartessos especially puzzling is the silence of sources after the time of Argonthonios. Herodotus records the generosity and wealth of the Tartessian king, but after that there is nothing. No further mention by Greek historians, no poems celebrating its rulers, no records of wars or treaties. A society once visible in the eyes of the Mediterranean world seems to dissolve into shadow. This silence may itself be evidence of decline. Without independence, without wealth, Tartessos may have lost the distinct identity that had once attracted attention. It may have survived only as a region absorbed into the growing networks of Carthage, or reduced to a scattering of local settlements with no greater voice as the centuries passed. Tartessos was remembered less as a real kingdom and more as a legend. Its treasures, its golden age, and its sudden disappearance created a mystery that later generations could not resist. The idea of a glittering city lost at the edge of the world was too powerful to ignore. In this way, Tartessos began to merge with other myths of lost civilizations. Some identified it with Atlantis, imagining it as the prototype of Plato's drowned city. Others saw it as a symbol of the transience of wealth, a warning that even the richest kingdoms can vanish without a trace. By the time Rome extended its power into Iberia, Tartessos was no longer remembered as a living society. It was already a ghost of the past, a half-forgotten name that clung to stories of treasure and loss. Archaeology has since recovered glimpses of its reality, but the truth of why it fell remains uncertain. War, environment, and internal weakness may all have played their part, each adding pressure until the kingdom could no longer endure. Thus, the vanishing of Tartessos is as mysterious as its rise. From dazzling wealth to sudden silence, it reminds us that civilizations, no matter how radiant, can fade swiftly from the stage of history. What remains is the legend, the story of a golden city at the mouth of the Guadalquivir that once flourished and then disappeared into the mists of time. The disappearance of Tartessos did not mark the end of its story. In many ways, that was only the beginning. The silence of ancient sources transformed the kingdom into a mystery, and centuries later, modern archaeology began to uncover pieces of the puzzle, from the marshes of the Guadalquivir to the hills of Andalusia. Excavations have revealed evidence of a civilization that once flourished and then faded. Each discovery has pulled Tartessos back into the light, while also fueling the idea that this lost kingdom may be none other than Spain's Atlantis, near the modern city of Huelva. Archaeologists have unearthed signs of settlement and metallurgy, dating back to the Tartessian period. The La Joya necropolis, a burial site rich with offerings, contains lavish goods that speak of elite families connected to the wider Mediterranean world. Weapons, ornaments, and finely crafted ceramics accompany the dead, suggesting a society that honored its leaders with displays of wealth and artistry. Farther inland, near Seville, the site of El Carambolo produced one of the most spectacular finds of all. Discovered in the mid-20th century, the treasure included golden diadems, necklaces, bracelets, and pectorals of remarkable craftsmanship. These objects confirm that Tartessian elites possessed immense wealth and were skilled in turning raw metal into works of art. Other sites add further detail. At Donna Blanca, near Cadiz, Excavations have revealed a fortified town that once stood on the edge of the Tartessian world. Its walls and buildings show careful planning and long-term occupation, indicating a society capable of complex urban organization. Together, these sites create a picture of a culture that was neither legend nor fantasy, but real and thriving. The treasures of Tartessos are not just myths. They are tangible, glittering reminders of a people who commanded wealth and creativity. The grandeur of Tartessos and its sudden disappearance have led many to link it with the story of Atlantis. When Plato described a powerful civilization that once ruled beyond the pillars of Heracles and then was lost, some later writers looked to the Iberian coast. Tartessos seemed to match parts of the tale. It was fabulously wealthy, located near the Atlantic, and it vanished abruptly from history. For those searching for Atlantis in the real world, Tartessos provided an alluring candidate. While most scholars today regard Plato's account as an allegory rather than literal history, the association has kept Tartessos alive in the imagination of many. To walk the marshes near the Guadalquivir is, for some, to wander in the shadow of Atlantis. In Spain, Tartessos became more than an archaeological subject. It grew into a symbol of national romanticism, a lost golden civilization that once flourished on Iberian soil. For poets and historians, it represented both pride and mystery, a reminder that the land had produced greatness long before Rome arrived. The treasures displayed in museums, glittering with gold and silver, became icons of a heritage both ancient and enigmatic. Tartessos was celebrated as the dawn of Iberian culture, the first great civilization of Spain, even as its secrets remained locked in undeciphered inscriptions and silent ruins. What then does Tartessos truly teach us? Its story is not only one of wealth, but also of fragility. A kingdom that built its power on metals and trade could shine brightly, but such foundations are vulnerable. When trade routes shifted, when rivals pressed in, when the environment changed, the brilliance of Tartessos could not be sustained. Its silence after 500 BCE is a reminder that prosperity does not guarantee permanence. Civilizations can flourish magnificently and then vanish, leaving behind only fragments for later generations to piece together. As we reach the end of this journey, we are left with both wonder and humility. Tartessos was a city of gold, a crossroads of cultures, and a beacon of wealth at the edge of the ancient world. It dazzled its contemporaries, inspired legends, and then disappeared into obscurity. Today we know it through scattered treasures, fortified ruins, and the words of distant historians. The rest lies in mystery. The search for Spain's Atlantis continues in every excavation, in every deciphered inscription, in every artifact brought out of the earth. Each find adds another thread to the tapestry, but the full picture may never be revealed. Perhaps that is part of the allure. Tartessos endures not only as history but as legend, a kingdom of gold that rose in brilliance and then fell into silence, leaving us with myths, memories, and scattered treasures gleaming faintly through time.